When you own homes and they talk about generational wealth, it really starts there. And I think there's so many misconceptions about home ownership, and often people are just afraid of the process.
Hello and welcome to episode 72 of the Smart Agents Podcast. My name is Michael Walter and I'll be your host. In today's episode, we're joined by Tampa-based Paula Beckford-Harrell. Just a month after getting her real estate license, the COVID pandemic took over our lives, but her ability to adapt and drive to help her community members gain generational wealth through home ownership has led to great success. Throughout our conversation, Paula shares how she attracts new buyer clients and how she ensures her buyers get the best deal possible. Now, before we get on to the day's featured interview, make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents Podcast. You can find the show on all major podcasting platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and now Amazon Music. Also, as you can see if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Click the bell to get notifications when each new episode is uploaded. Lastly, if you or somebody else on your team has an inspirational story or real estate tips to share with our community, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. We're always on the lookout for new stories to share. All right, let's get on to the day's featured interview with Paula. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you do as well. But yeah, if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you're at in the country,
Sure.
and how you got into real estate.
Sure. I'm Paula Beckford-Harrell. I'm a real estate agent with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Florida Properties Group. And I'm here in the Tampa market, which we love to call Tampa Bay. I live in Hillsborough County, the south end of it, where there's such tremendous growth in general. And it's great to be a part of this market. I started real estate getting close to 2 years ago. For many years, I was in healthcare, and after 30 years of doing contract negotiations, marketing, and sales, I decided to take all of that skill set and pour my heart and love into real estate. So yeah, I've been doing this for the last almost 2 years now.
Right. Well, in 2 years, it's been quite the 2 years to get into real estate, too.
Oh my God, if ever, talk about it. I was one of the last individuals who took their test prior to lockdown with COVID. Going back to 2000, I got my license in late February and then took about a month to just interview with different brokers to figure out what made sense for me. And I actually joined Berkshire in April of 2020. And talking about a wild time to start a brand new career. I mean, here we were on lockdown. Thank God realtors were essential workers. And it was just trying to team up with people. We were trying to figure out what safe protocols to put in place to do open houses, how we could do them. Appraisers were challenged with how you're going to do appraisal on a home, really dependent upon the realtors and the photographers to take as many pictures as possible, be as descriptive as possible, so that we could all fulfill, everyone's dream still of home ownership.
Right. So, I mean, what was that like? Because you didn't have those habits that you had created, before COVID, as in the industry. So you kind of, I guess, as a positive, you were able to kind of create, that whole way of doing business without a backlog of knowledge of the ways you used to do things.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things immediately you had to engage with was social media was a huge part of what we did. It helped supporting outreach from the standpoint of inventory of what was available. It helped from a perspective of education, some like what we're doing right now on this podcast. And we just had to find ways to be creative. I always came from a background where I was used to doing video conferences. So that helped me. So engaging from the perspective of now turning this to be more customer focused instead of business focused, I think was probably the biggest challenge in the beginning. But everyone got adapted really quickly to the new environment. And I tell you, it was a joy. It was a pleasure because it really made you be creative. I found a lot of my buyers through different rooms on Facebook, different, groups that I was a part of within my community. It's how I got to know a lot of my neighbors during that time, because I'd closed on a house 6 months before lockdown of this new career. Part of me was like, am I crazy to be doing this in this time? But it pushed us all in a way to be creative and find ways to outreach that were meaningful. And I tell you, I don't think things are going to change. I think people enjoy this. It allows us to connect 24 hours a day. We can figure out what makes sense with our schedules, and we can all be productive and interactive in a way that's meaningful to make these transactions happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just this, I mean, I do other things on the, in my career, and you're obviously doing other things. And it's just, let's look at our schedules. We figure it out, and we can jump on, do this real quickly, and, go about our days. And I think
I love it.
Yeah.
And even with your clients, back in the day, you would talk to someone on the phone, trying to get them into your office or finding a place. I mean, we just jump on, we do a Zoom call, we do Google Meet, we do whatever platform there is up to it, including FaceTime as well, too, for the iPhone users, which I am. Let me just say, I'm an Apple person, so I'm guilty of that, and then, Facebook Messenger, we've all figured it out together. I love it because immediately as an agent, I'm interacting with someone in a much more personal way than just a phone call where they don't see a face, they don't see expressions. And I want to read their expressions too. I want to make sure that when we're talking about things that they're trending and they're comfortable with what's being said, because my business model is all off transparency. I find that to be the best way to do business. And if you're transparent with your clients, it just creates a really great environment. And everyone feels like it's a win-win in the process. The lenders also working with, obviously, the closing agents as well, too. It's just so many people involved in the process to make this happen. And open communications are just wonderful. It just makes it flow so much better.
Yeah. And I think that's really important when so much is done virtually or, when you're not in person, is to have that real sense of trust between, yourself and the buyer or the seller.
Yeah. I just went through basically a virtual closing with one of my clients. It was with a new home construction lender. It was the first time they did a virtual notary. So that was a whole new experience unto itself. Florida is a bit different from other states. Where we still have, we still focus more on land-based closings and those interactions. So it was pretty cool to experience that one. It took a little time. We had a little bit of challenge in Wi-Fi, which that did freak us out. I'm not going to lie. We were like, but we jumped on those hotspots on the phone. We made it happen, and it was good.
Well, great. Well, and obviously, Tampa itself, like you said, is just grown so much over time, and really. And I'd imagine even with this crazy housing market that we've had the last, 18 months or so, what's that been like, working with these clients, through trying to find a home for them when it can be very challenging right now?
That is a great question. Tampa, from a Florida perspective, Tampa is one of the fastest growing markets that we've had. Some recent economic reports that have come out for third quarter of this year show that we are the highest double-digit market that's growing. It's incredible. We actually were second in the state for third quarter, behind Phoenix being, I think, first. We were second, Miami being third. So that is just huge for this market. And I have a lot of families who have worked so hard on their credit. They've been saving money, trying to do the right thing, but it's hard. How do you compete in a seller's market? So here it is. We have these wonderful interest rates, which allow us to buy more home, right? But we can't compete because we have a lot of people coming from out of state or more experienced buyers that may have equity in their home or 401ks or greater savings, and they're able to put more than the home is valued at. And we just can't do that when you have a smaller budget. So one of the things I tried to do living in Hillsborough County is looking at what was available for my buyers. And I got really involved in learning more about USDA loans. It has been a lifesaver for so many of my clients, because guess what? We looked at USDA. The challenge that we had sometimes with it in a resale market is a lot of other realtors weren't familiar with it. And as a result, I found myself educating colleagues to try and get them to accept my clients to, utilize USDA loans to buy these homes that qualified. So I turned to new home construction, and I reached out to a lot of builders that I was working with other clients. And I was like, hey, I need to know which properties you have in these counties that have USDA eligible homes. Because remember, the home has to be eligible for USDA. Right. It can't apply to every single property. So it is property specific. It's also specific by county regarding income and some other criteria. But the fact that these opportunities are out there, I said, I got to get my families in on some homes. So I was fortunate enough living in Hillsborough County. A lot of homes in Waimama and Ruskin were USDA eligible with these new home builders. So it was wonderful. I worked a lot with Starlight Homes, Lennar, and D.R. Horton. Called and spoke with so many different folks in their sales office and was able to narrow and come up with a list of basically locations and communities that had eligible homes. Once I had that list, I was circling back to clients that were, again, like I said, had good credit, were just struggling with the amount of money that they could put into these deals. So I'm a visual person. So I'm going to put my glasses on because I want to be able to see this and read this for you guys. So bear with me. I want to give you an example of a family that was able to close on a home about 4 months ago. Just put in relevant terms. They purchased a home in Ruskin. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, 2-story, actually on the water, okay, waterfront property. $267,000 was the price of the home, okay? Because they were USDA, there is no money down, but obviously you still have to secure the contract, right? But whatever you put down to secure your contract will go towards your closing costs. So with this particular builder, USDA basically clients only have to put down $2,000. The seller also gives credit. So if you use the seller's lender and you use the seller's closing company for a new home build, they will also give credits, give monies towards that client as well too. For this particular model home they purchased, the builder gave them an $8,000 credit. Now, under USDA, you're allowed to get 6% up to gift funding from a seller or from someone else towards it. So that $8,000 was within that parameter. So at the time of closing, all they had to come up with was an additional $4,212. So complete out of pocket, and their home was slightly underappraised. So they just had a couple of $100s off. This family had to come up with $6,400. Brand new home, under warranty, on the lakefront, can't beat it. Total out of pocket, $6,400, and their mortgage payment is slightly under $1,800 a month. Right. I mean, they were paying more for that than rent. So for them, this home was a blessing because they were going to be saving money. They had a growing family. The home allowed them to grow into it. And guess what? Had they bought that home, their credit allowed them to be qualified for a conventional mortgage. So as a first-time home buyer, conventional, if they'd gone that route, they would have had to come up with 3% down. Right. So when you're looking at that on a home, it would have been, let me see, I'm looking at their stuff. If they had gone the conventional route, they would have had to come up with roughly about $9,000. Right. They didn't have to come up with $9,000 plus closing costs. They were able, total out of pocket, a little over $6,000. So that is the gift and the beauty of USDA. Also, when you have a home and you pay less than 20% down, as you know, you have to pay for mortgage insurance. And you pay that mortgage insurance until the home builds sufficient equity, and then you don't pay that mortgage insurance anymore. So when you look at USDA in comparison to like FHA, which a lot of first-time home buyers qualify for, or even conventional, the upfront fee is only 1% with USDA, whereas FHA is at 1.75%. But even more importantly, from a monthly perspective, you're only looking at like 0.35%. And I put that zero in front, guys, because I don't want you to think it's 35. So it's 0.35%. When you're looking at FHA, it's 0.85%. That difference is huge in your monthly amount. So you're talking about almost a third of what you'd have to pay. So even from a month-to-month basis, over the life of that loan, it's still affordable. So I love USDA loans for my first-time home buyers when they qualify for it. It is an income-sensitive program based on the county that you live in, based on the amount of individuals in the home, under 18, over 18. But I just, again, I'm not a lender, but I want to talk to people about it. When you speak to lenders, ask them, do you do USDA loans? So when they're saying that you're approved for conventional or FHA, just say, is this a loan type my family would qualify for? And then obviously it gives you some options. So home ownership is absolutely possible. There are so many different vehicles and ways to access it. And you really need to find a realtor that will help you. And just one other thing, if I could say to buyers, you do not have to pay for a realtor. That is paid for by the seller. So if you are a first-time home buyer or you're any buyer, why would you engage in a transaction without someone who can help you throughout that process? And even when you do new home construction, those costs are paid for by the builder. So still, don't walk into a sales office alone without someone helping you to navigate a very detailed process that is going to be a part of your life. So don't go in there alone, get some help from a professional, and make sure you have someone that is, well experienced in different types of loans to help you navigate what's going to work best for your family. And again, one other disclosure, the only thing you'll ever pay for as a buyer from a brokerage is really that broker's transaction management fee. We all have it. It's a small fee. At Berkshire, it's $325. It ranges by broker, obviously, but that's the only thing as a buyer you pay out of pocket at closing to your realtor. All of the other commissions come from the seller, irregardless if it's a resale property or if it's a new home construction property. So just focus on your budget for you, and you don't have to worry about us.
Right. So when you were searching out these different loan programs, what was it that made you really kind of want to kind of go after that and look and find those different options for these families that were having that trouble? What kind of sparked that?
No, well, what sparked it for me is that home ownership has been, the core of my family. My parents owned a home. My husband and I got married in my early 20s. 1 year after being married, we actually took our money that we got as wedding gifts and we bought our own home. And, through home ownership, we've been able to do so many wonderful things in our life. Our children have a debt-free education. In addition to that, we were able to buy other properties, including investment properties. I mean, when you own homes and they talk about generational wealth, it really starts there. And you don't have to be a tremendous wage earner to access having a home or owning a home. And I think there's so many misconceptions about home ownership, and often people are just afraid of the process. Just the whole loan application alone scares people away. And people hear these horror stories about the evil underwriters and what they ask of you. And listen, there's no person out there that has not had some kind of challenge in their credit, even whether it's, you had an overdraft with a check or just something that has occurred. Those things will come up as part of your credit history. Those things will be asked of you during the process, but they are questions that you can answer. And with a great lender and an experienced realtor, between the two of them, they can help you to construct your response to explain what happened at that time. And once you respond, the underwriter is not going to challenge well, why did you choose to pay for your medication over whatever it was in that one period of time. They just want to understand what happened in your life for that one or two instances or whatever it may be. And you respond, and that suffices the file to just understand that you're a responsible individual. That's really what it's about, is looking at the type of decisions you make and how you handled it. And that really usually suffices it. And you're able to get your loan. So I would ask folks, please don't be afraid of getting pre-approved because you don't know how to shop and what you're shopping for until you know what your budget is. I have a lot of people who are renters and they're like, oh, well, we paid this amount for rent and I want this house for like $500,000. And I go, have you been pre-approved? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, what made you think that you could afford this amount of a home? Sometimes people are like, well, I used a calculator online. But let me explain about those online calculators, okay? They usually only talk about the actual purchase price and interest rate, okay? They're not looking into mortgage insurance. They don't know about taxes, all of the other variables which impact your ability to come up with a monthly budget. So by the time you have reality introduced into those scenarios, all of a sudden the person who thought maybe it was a $500,000 home, now we're looking at a home for $325,000. Which is a great budget. But again, before we start going and looking at homes and setting up false expectations, let's know what we're shopping with. That's what I try and do with my clients. I'm like, hey, let's figure this out first and then let's hit the road. And it always works better that way because then you can figure out what your needs are versus what your wants and what are we willing to compromise on. And then we figure out, from that particular budget, now that you've been pre-approved, you've got a lender. Did you talk to them about USDA? Are you a veteran? Are you thinking about accessing your VA loan? So let's get through all of those exercises, and then we know what we can afford, and now we can start to negotiate.
Right. I think that's really important, is to be able to set those parameters for your buyers to know, so that they're not looking at these places that are so far out of range that it gets them frustrated with the whole process.
Correct. And also, what's your budget? Because we're still in a seller's market. Things are beginning to, I wouldn't say that they're calming down. Maybe a home is on the market instead of 24 minutes. We may get it for 72 hours. Right. It's like sometimes I've hit push on that MLS listing. And I mean, by the time I turn around, my phone is blowing up with offers sight unseen. So, again, you may have a couple of days in the process versus a couple of minutes, like what we saw earlier this year. But you still have to have the finances to be competitive. And your budget is your budget. And as long as you know what that money is, we can work with it. We can make it happen. So being open, being flexible, are you someone who's okay with maybe ripping up carpet and putting in floors? Are you someone at a point in your life where you're like, I'm not handy. I don't like talking to people. I don't want to go through the process of people submitting bids. Just give me something turnkey and get me in there. Okay, you want turnkey? Well, maybe we adjust the budget a little bit to accommodate turnkey. So every single person has a different circumstance. I try and work with those circumstances and your budget to make it a win-win. And if we, like I said, we're open in the whole process. And as long as we have open communications, it's not about judgment. I don't judge. You don't have to tell me why it happened. I don't need that. I just want to know, listen, you got X amount in the bank. I would love for you to close with money in the bank, because we always want that money for a rainy day, right? We don't want to drain our funds. And as long as we work within that, we will find a home for you. So you just got to be patient and it will happen.
Yeah. So with those, talking about that, having that money in the bank and not not using up everything. Obviously, a lot of these homes are selling for, the bidding process gets out of control sometimes. So what kind of conversation do you have to say, hey, you know what? I know you love this house, but for the price it's going for, we really need to walk away from this. What are those conversations like with these buyers?
So I go back to my beginning interview process, and I said, listen, at the beginning when we met, we talked about this was your budget. We talked about the fact that families may or may not have other family members to give a gift towards that purchase. For those who are blessed enough to have individuals who can get gift funds, if they don't need it for closing costs, sometimes we use that gift money, what we put in our budget, for an incentive. So maybe we offer a seller $5,000 towards their closing costs. Maybe we offer or use that as what we call gap appraisal on a resale, so that in the event that, the home doesn't appraise the value, we'll take $5,000 and add towards additional cash at closing to make that deal possible. So, cash towards seller closing, gap appraisal is always two of the most attractive things in a deal. We look at the monies and we figure out what percentage of it can be used towards a seller and what we call like incentives that we would give the seller. And then what percentage of that budget is hardcore down payment, closing costs, a moving truck. Because I want, you got to get out from where you are. That's another thing. So make sure a part of the thing that I do with my clients is I'm like, what are you taking from that home? What's going into the new home? And I actually have them start sourcing, believe it or not, early in the process, what moving costs are. Because if you don't factor that in and you spend all your money and then you're like, wait a second, I got a Corolla and how am I going to move a 2-bedroom apartment into a house? You gotta have that money too. So that's part of what I create as an overall budget for what it really costs to purchase a home and to move into it.
Right. I think that having that budget for the overall move is super important, because if you haven't moved, there's some people, if you haven't moved in 10 years, those moving expenses are crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just the moving truck alone is insane.
I've had clients that have come from out of state, and I'm like, listen, how much do you really like that bedroom set? Really and truly, I'll give you a great example. I have a really good friend of mine who recently sold her home move from Miami to Georgia. So we're going Miami to Atlanta. Let's just put point to point, like on our little map, okay? She came from a 5-bedroom home. They were downsizing to a 4, woohoo, one whole room. She liked her furniture because she had bought a lot of it in the last 3 years. $30,000 was the price for her to move it. And I said, honest to God, if it was me, I'd sell it. I'd sell the stuff and buy some new stuff. I mean, outside of 1 or 2 pieces that might be important that you could have some folks throw in the back of a U-Haul and hitch it to your truck. I said, I'm not lying to you. I would not pay $30,000 to move my stuff.
Right.
I'd figure out what was important and maybe spend 6 at best, and then take that $24,000 and go shopping.
Yeah.
It's just like, I was like, I've never slept on any bed I love that much to spend 30 grand to move it. So yeah. So you got to figure out, what does it cost? And, everything has gone up in price, against obviously with COVID. I mean, it impacts food prices and housing and just about everything you can think of. So while borrowing money is very inexpensive at this time, the price of goods in general and services is challenging. Yeah. So even getting a moving truck, I tell a lot of my clients, resale is easier because we have a good idea of what that closing date is. May vary by, 3 or 4 days north or south of that number. But wow, for my families that buy new home construction, that's crazy. I mean, we had mirrors issues, we had windows, all kind of things that push those closing dates all over the map. So for those families that are buying new home construction, locking down on a moving truck date is a nightmare because they're booked way in advance. And the more you book closer to the date is the more that they sometimes, unfortunately, will add additional fees to make it happen. So yeah, I actually absolutely include moving and what those fees are. And I said, let's start working with people way in advance to figure out, how much of that is going to eat out your budget as well too.
Right. So as you were getting your start and as you're 2 years in, how have you been, marketing yourself to bring in those new clients? What are you doing to kind of get your name out there?
I use a lot of social media to bring in clients, usually Facebook. I will be honest that on Instagram, I have a tremendous following from realtors, which is wonderful for listings. LinkedIn, I've got about 1,200 followers on LinkedIn from my prior business life. And through LinkedIn, believe it or not, I get a lot of buyers because I have a lot of folks that are in HR and human resources, and they have a lot of relocations that they deal with. So I have listings out there. I've reached out to a lot of companies I worked in the past, and I'm like, when you have your reloads, please call me. I'd love to help the family, even if they're renting for the first year to figure out the area, and then next year is a buy. I work with them because people have different stages in their life that they need housing for, and sometimes it's not always a purchase or a sell. Sometimes you rent in the interim. Or even they may need some business space for a trailing spouse that's a hairdresser and wants to open a salon here. I've had those circumstances too. So social media, depending upon the platform, is great. So for me, Instagram is great to connect with other realtors. LinkedIn helps me a lot with buyers, relocation specialists, and Facebook is a wonderful tool that I use, obviously a social media platform for both buyers and sellers. There's a lot of different groups you can be a part of, but I like to farm in my area. So I do a lot of stuff within Riverview, Gibsonton, Ruskin, Waimama, Sun City Center, Lithia, those areas. And I join a lot of those groups. So I look for buyers on those platforms. I also put my listings on them as well too, which obviously brings me more buyers as well. I can't tell you as a realtor how many times something as simple as an open house, believe it or not, brings a lot of buyers to the table. People walk in without a realtor. They need one. I'm happy to be a realtor. I've had a couple of families that have been buyers with me where the home I was selling at the time was early in the process. So they didn't buy that home, but they were just looking around to figure it out. And I became their realtor. And here it is. I met them at an open house maybe 2-3 months ago for a property that wasn't ready for them yet. And I put them in a new property. Right. So it's amazing. So I love open houses from a face-to-face interaction, but Facebook is wonderful. And I tell you another platform that's great too, as well as Nextdoor. A little bit more cumbersome from a user perspective, kind of broader audience, but still, even within Nextdoor, it's beginning to reorganize its platform and allowing for those rooms that you can go into and interact with people in a way that's meaningful and turn that into transactions. So yeah, I love all of those platforms. I use them for my business model. And that's how I was able to thrive in the pandemic in the beginning of shutdown and start to grow my new business. And that's how I've continued to grow it as well, too. That's how we met.
Right.
We met on Instagram. So It was great. Yeah.
Right. And I really, what you just said about there with the LinkedIn and finding those relocation specialists and those HR directors, I think that's a really smart idea, because if you can get in with those people, that's a revolving door of business that's always coming in. How did you, and I know you've had several of these relationships from your previous, your previous career, but for agents that hear this and are like, yeah, that's a really great idea. What tips do you have for creating those relationships with those HR specialists?
Sure, great. It's a great question. I would tell a lot of realtors that often in real estate, we focus on one-to-one relationships directly with a client, whether they're on the buy or sell side. But building a platform, what we call B2B or business to business relationships, is key in really making that model grow and to be replicable in a certain way. So I'd highly recommend taking a look at local events that are occurring in the community, local agencies. Get involved with some human resource organizations like SHRM. They're always looking for vendors, and that's SHRM is the acronym for them. Get involved with them and find out when they're having local events and be a sponsor. Sponsor a table. Table sponsorship is really not that expensive, and it's a great way to interact at conferences with people in other industries. And if you're going after that relo market, I would highly recommend being a vendor at some of their events, talking with local HR folks, and that's how you get to know them. So definitely, if you're new to this from the standpoint of outreach and relocation, I'd highly recommend looking at local HR organizations and just being something as a vendor at some of their engagements or their events. Cost of a table is usually under $500 from a pricing perspective. You can go bigger if you wanted to, but obviously minimum entry point is at that value. And I think you'll enjoy it and you'll be able to grow your business in a different way.
Yeah, I really think that's a great way to kind of build up that pipeline, especially if you can get into some of these companies that are, ingrained and growing in your company, because they're always going to be bringing people in.
Yeah. And also, for those realtors that are also veterans as well, too, get involved with the VA. Look at the schedule of things that are being done, through the Veterans Association, and see how you can engage in a way to interact with people on a broader scope. Because really, after a while, people, I know there's lead generation programs and people buy leads and, you do all different types of things, but believe it or not, that good old fashioned business to business strategy does work. But I will tell you, you have to commit to it. Don't expect to go to one event or to go to you drop your stuff off at an accountant's or a lawyer's office or any of these other folks. Don't expect to get business on the first visit. People want to see that you're committed. They want to see your face. So be willing to put at least 6 to 9 months into this strategy, and then eventually you will reap those rewards. But keep in mind, again, and I will tell realtors, we have a budget too. So, from a business, I got to put my business hat on. Make sure you work on your budget. For me, any business I've ever been involved with, every transaction, I always took a percentage of that and reinvested in the company. And I think we have to do that as well, too, as realtors. Every time you have a closing, take a percentage of that closing and put it to the side and say, these are going to be my marketing dollars. So, $500 may seem pretty steep if you're a new realtor and you're doing this full time, but you close 3 transactions and you put a little money aside each time, you can afford to do that event. And as you get more leads and you close more clients and you keep that strategy of, tithing to yourself, if you want to call it, you take 10%, I like that number, 10% to start with, and you put a little something away and you will be surprised how it will blossom and grow. You don't have to spend a lot of money to make money in this industry. You just have to be consistent. You have to make yourself available. And also, don't spread yourself so thin. I see a lot of folks, they're all over the place. I mean, I'm exhausted when I watch some people's activities. I'm exhausted with my own. But I'm a firm believer of, I think of my own transactions when I bought my own home. And I wish I had a realtor early in my first part of buying, because I started in my 20s. I wish I had someone who told me with my very first home that we bought as a fixer-upper. I was an idiot to sell that home. I mean, I bought a home in 1994, $86,000. We used the money we actually got from our wedding, and we decided to, instead of like doing something else with it, we decided to put it down and buy this home. We were conventional. I don't know if we would have qualified for USDA or if the home was even USDA eligible back then, but I didn't have anybody to give me any other options. I mean, it was kind of like, here's the price. Okay, here's what we're offering. You guys seem to be making good money for two young kids at the time. And it was like, we're going conventional. And we went, okay. I didn't even know that I could have shopped for a loan. Back then, I went to my local bank where I did have our checking account, and we applied for the loan. It's just kind of like the beginning of the internet, guys, for those watching it. So you actually walked into a bank, you took a pen and filled out a paper application, and somebody called you about a week or so later and told you if they can make it happen. And we weren't given anything. So we were blessed that we had money to put into this transaction. But man, had I had somebody who was experienced when I was going on to the next home 6 years later, and we got to finally buy that dream property that we wanted, I should have just taken equity out of that home and bought the other one, because that starter home would have been a great rental. And periodically, I decide to just constantly really stab myself in the heart, and I'll run comps on that very first home that we ran. Right. That little home that we had, that 3-2 pool home that was on a canal that we bought for $86,000 in 94. That home is comping today at 412.
Right.
So, when I thinking of Dr. Seuss, the things we can think, when I think the think we could think about what I could have done, keeping that home and just keep using it to fuel the future. I wish I had someone who had that level of experience to tell me that. I came from a family, like I said, who owned homes, but in my parents' entire marriage of over 50 years, they owned 2 properties, one in Jamaica where they were from, and they sold that home and came to the United States, and they bought one in the United States. So they weren't, again, they had their children, we were educated, lots of beautiful things came from home ownership, but I didn't have that experience in my background to show me what that home could have done. It was with my second home that I got smart and I started educating myself, and I was like, okay, what are we doing with this one? Because, think of what we could have done. So I really take my inexperience as a first-time buyer, back when I was married, way back when, for almost 3 decades ago. And I try and help my clients, regardless of their age, and to say, here's what you could do. This doesn't necessarily mean it's your first home. You may be taking equity from this one, and you may be becoming a landlord with that home in the future, and you're going to buy another home. And I try and excite them about all the things that real estate can do for their life. So that's where my passion is kind of educating it and being that a different conduit to them than maybe what I had experienced in the past. Right. So, I even laugh at my most recent transaction was the home that I'm living in now, which I absolutely love. So I actually used the same realtor to help me from selling my home in South Florida to buying this one here. And I would tell you, I'm a pretty great client which I had from a standpoint of the both properties, and not even as much as a holiday card post-transaction. Like, they never kept in touch with me. Here I am now, a realtor. So technically I'm competing with them in the same market. And, I laugh because I'm like, it's so important to keep in touch with people. Mm-hmm. So when we talk to realtors, stay in touch with your clients, because you know what? If you lose them, that's on you. That's on you. That's how people steal your clients every day. Because look at me, if I wasn't doing real estate myself, I'm an easy client for anyone to have stolen, because like I said, my person, everyone said if the keys worked after the closing, they weren't like, hey, please work. Or did you even do something as simple like maybe do homestead extension. So I do all of that stuff for my clients. I talk to them about homestead. I put things on my calendar. I send them the link, plus I send them the paper application so they can see what they're going to be doing when they log in. So yeah, I do all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me this morning. And, I can definitely see why you've had so much success in the 2 years that you've been in it.
No, I love what I do. And I think that's important as well, too. If you're looking for a home on the buy or sell side, make sure you interview. You have the opportunity to interview as buyer or seller. Interview folks and make sure that their personalities mesh well with yours, because you guys are going to be together for a couple of weeks. No matter how you do the transaction and how fast things move, you got a minimum of about 2 to 3 months together. So make sure that you guys see each other along that journey and that the personalities go well and that they can help you. So yeah, but thank you. Thank you for what you guys do. This is so great. I mean, it helps realtors to learn more. It's helping buyers and sellers to think about different things. So I feel honored that you guys reached out to me to ask me to be part of your platform. And thank you again. And hopefully 2022 is going to bring everyone what they've been dreaming about and working so hard for.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you too.
I want to thank Paula for joining us today and really love her approach to working with the HR coordinators to fill her buyer pipeline. So once again, if you think you or someone else on your team has an awesome story or tips to share with our community, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. Well, that wraps things up for this episode, but remember, follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Again, I'm Michael Walter, and we'll see you on the next episode.